And Solomon Islands has a new Prime Minister after MPs elected Jeremiah Manele to the role in a secret ballot. The former Foreign Minister secured the top job after former PM Manasseh Sogavare withdrew from the race. He's expected to help thaw tensions with Australia while maintaining close ties with China. Let's get more now on that story. Ed Cavanough is a researcher and author of a book on China and Solomon Islands relations, and he joins us now from all places, Dublin. Ed Cavanough, welcome. So do you think Solomon Islands-China relationship will continue along basically as it has been under the new leadership drawing closer to China?
Yeah, look, there's nothing to suspect that the new Prime Minister will be shifting away from the development of relations that we've seen. I think, he was, of course, the Foreign Minister for the past 5 years in Solomons, and that's been the period in which this relationship has been consolidated. I think what we'll see, though, is a little less bombast from the new Prime Minister. You just showed pictures of his first speech in front of the Solomon Islands Parliament. He's, adopted a remarkably conciliatory tone, which is quite a contrast from his predecessor, who was known to not only develop this relationship with China, but really quite strategically leverage that against other international partners for various gains. So we're not expecting any significant policy shift to what they call this look north policy, but we are expecting potentially that the new Prime Minister is a little bit more conciliatory at home, but also abroad with partners like Australia.
Yeah, your description of that speech outside Parliament as quite a contrast to Manasseh Sogavare is quite an understatement. So why did Manasseh Sogavare lose support and pull out if the China relations are going to basically continue as is?
Well, we've seen, Joe, over the past few years, somewhat of a caricature emerge of Manasseh Sogavare. Now, he's certainly a bombastic character. But there were some in Australia in particular that, assumed that he was going to be a dictator. He was some sort of Chinese proxy, that he was setting up for, a life in power. That wasn't necessarily the case. In the book that I put together, I did a pretty extensive profile of Manasseh Sogavare's history, his biography, his motivations. And this is a man who had 4 cracks at the prime ministership. His first 3 were quite unsuccessful in many ways. And his primary motivation over the past 5 years has really been to secure the legacy of having a full term in Parliament. He was able to achieve that through some pretty clever and calculated politics over the past few years. But he's certainly a controversial figure at home. He's not widely loved. He's probably respected by certain members of the community, but he's certainly controversial too. And I think people within his own governing coalition saw, a future with Manasseh Sogavare is probably not the best way to navigate the next few years ahead. And Sogavare himself was, I think, satisfied with having achieved his primary ambition, which was to be a Solomon Islands Prime Minister that rarely has survived a full term in power.
And so why did he initiate the push towards closer ties with China?
Well, though he was certainly a supporter of the push towards China, he's embraced it. He's, you see him there, enjoying all the sort of accoutrement of the relationship with China. It wasn't just Sogavare that pushed pushed Solomon Islands towards this relationship. There was a growing movement within the country, largely from within the Chinese business community within Solomon Islands, to formalize those ties. And his embrace of China was not just to get concessions from China itself, but also to ensure that there were effectively, more flow of aid and support coming in from other international partners. And it's certainly been a controversial path for Solomons over the past few years. But what is clear is that now we're all talking about Solomon Islands, that Solomon Islands is not being ignored on the international stage. And despite the, I think, legitimate controversy and concern around many aspects of this relationship with China, it's hard to dispute that really it has seen Solomon Islands step up in terms of its presence on the world stage.
Yeah, so you think it has been strategically successful, and do you think Australia has anything to worry about the further development of that relationship?
There are aspects of the relationship that are concerning. We've, of course, had a security deal signed between Solomons and China at the start of 2022. And one of the worrying things about that deal was that no one saw the language. It's still actually been behind closed doors effectively. So people do not know every aspect and every detail of that arrangement. That is concerning. Potentially, the new Prime Minister, as an act of conciliation, could even publicise that agreement and make that a bit more transparent. That would be a good move and would be well received across the region. But broadly speaking, I think this is a moment that there is an opportunity for partners like Australia to not just be fearful of China's presence, but use China's presence as a real contrast to the way that Australia and other traditional donors act in Solomon Islands. I think what's clear so far from the China relationship and the way that China has engaged Solomon Islands is it hasn't necessarily appeased existing skepticism and scrutiny within the Solomon Islands population of China. So effectively, the aid and support that they have delivered so far was really supporting projects that Manasseh Sogavare, as the Prime Minister, wanted for his own political ambitions, rather than supporting the genuine development aspirations of Solomon Islanders themselves. So I think that presents an opening for Australia to not just see a China relationship with Solomons inherently as a threat, but as an opportunity to really renew its relationship and to be the partner that works towards solving a lot of those really long-term structural economic development issues in Solomon Islands.
And you've published a book on Solomons, as you mentioned. What are a few things that you think Australians should understand about this nation of 1,000 islands?
Yeah, it is truly one of the most remarkable places in the world. I think we perceive it as this small, fragile, sort of almost irrelevant place in our imagination. It's anything but. It's a remarkably diverse, complicated, beautiful country. It's a joy to travel and to report around. It's been a real thrill to be able to do that over the past few years. But we also have to remember that we can't underestimate the agency of individuals within Solomon Islands, but also with their politicians and their political leadership. Manasseh Sogavare was a very dexterous, skillful, savvy politician on the international stage. He often managed to, effectively get China or Australia or the United States to engage in ways that you wouldn't expect them to. And he did that without really any material power at all, just a political savvy. And there is a political sophistication within that country that we cannot ignore. And you don't want to necessarily underestimate any new politician either. Jeremiah Manele, the new Prime Minister, is a bit of an unknown commodity in some ways. But he, could also be quite effective in ways that we sometimes don't anticipate. So the long story, and really the point of the book, is really don't underestimate these countries. They have a way of sometimes being in the driver's seat that you wouldn't expect.
Okay, now I understand we've interrupted your honeymoon for this chat. I'm sorry about that, and I hope you have an understanding partner. And I hope Ireland. Can you recommend Ireland as a wonderful place to have a honeymoon?
It's a bit grey. The other option was Solomon Islands, so maybe not a bad option.
Good stuff. Okay, Ed, congratulations, and thanks so much for having a chat to us.
Thank you.